Hey, what is going on, guys? This is Evan Cheney for cruelfan.com, and today we're going to just go over week 9 of the NFL season and, how it relates to DFS purposes. I'll be going over the Sunday main slate, and then I'll dabble talking about Sunday Night Football and Showdown, right? Because there's obviously things to be um, things to be discussed there as well. Right there's dings and dongs everywhere. So all these noises on my computer, get distracted easily. So anyway, we'll go position by position here, and I'll talk about all these different guys up and down the DraftKings pricing spectrum here. And then because there's definitely some guys worth mentioning in each game. And then, look at these totals a bit, because there are some spots, I guess, where you can gain an edge for sure. I know for sure. For example, if you want to look at Seattle and Buffalo, right? Because we're going to go into quarterbacks anyway, right? I think the Seattle-Buffalo game, as highly owned as it's going to be, it's definitely the spot worth attacking, right? Because especially with Seattle's defense, right? Seattle defensively is not great right now. I know they've been allowing like a crap load of fantasy points per game offensively, or to like other offenses, and so because of that, it's like this is actually a good buy low spot for Josh Allen, because he's struggled himself, or he's had a string of some difficult matchups, right? If you want to look at Josh Allen at 7,000, he's had some struggles, but like some of these matchups have been difficult, right? New England's kind of so-so, right? You always know that Bill Belichick can create a good game plan, but like, and Buffalo still won, but he 11 of 18. He didn't really have to throw that often, right? The game script didn't really force him to throw the ball too often, so that's why he only scored 13.5, right? The Jets game, he scored 20, which is fine, not great, but it's fine, especially at the price point. Kansas City, he's had a string of games that have been expected, right? Like, he obviously started the season hot, and I think a lot of people are kind of cold on him right now because he's burned people. So I think Josh Allen is definitely one of the top quarterbacks of the week. You also have Kyler Murray, who's going up against Miami. That should be a pretty up-tempo game, right? I think currently that total is at 49.5, depending on where you want to look. But I think that has a ton of upside too for Kyler Murray, because he has just shown upside in any situation. Again, if you want to look at any need for Seattle, right? Last week's game, 2 weeks ago, I guess, right? Yeah, 2 weeks ago against Seattle. He scored 41 DraftKings points. He just threw the ball over the field. So again, it just justifies Josh Allen even more, even though he's 7,000, right? So you have that. So I think Kyler Murray against Miami, that's definitely a good spot. There's some other spots too if you want to go value, right? Because you can even go Patrick Mahomes, but you also want to spend down a quarterback a lot of the time. Again, only because you want to be able to spend up at skill positions, right? So I think Drew Lock actually makes for a really good opportunities, 5,200 this week. If you want to go back, he hasn't done a ton fantasy-wise since coming back, but he scored 21 DraftKings points last week in the comeback win. And I think there's a ton of upside again because he's cheap and he's going up against the Atlanta Falcons, right? There's not much else you need to say there other than, what do we have as a total here? I can't even. We have a total of 50 right now. Atlanta's actually favored. See, and that's the thing too. Like if you're gonna Like, I mean, let's just say that holds, right? And let's just say Atlanta is actually going to be leading the majority of the game and even win, right? Drew Lock at this cheap price is going to play against that crappy defense in Atlanta. And he's going to, I mean, he's cheap as hell. And you can stack him with guys that I'll talk about. And I mean, Broncos are definitely one of the top stacks of the week. I mean, you can even, look at the lineup build, right? I mean, we can even say, right? We can look at Jerry Jeudy, Drew Lock. You want to throw Noah Fant in there because I think those are more the top targets right now. Actually, let's check. This is the air yards data. Yeah, I mean, well, Tim Patrick. Yeah, well, now this is only looking at. Yeah, so maybe you can look at Tim Patrick as well, right? Instead of Fant, you go Tim Patrick, who's questionable, but still, look how cheap that stack is, right? You're getting your quarterback for $5,200. I mean, you're paying for a wide receiver at 47. I mean, this is a very cheap team to stack, but the downside of all that is it'll probably be highly owned, right? I expect this cavalcade of Denver skill players to be highly owned this week, and for good reason. Again, because they're cheap. But again, we're talking about quarterbacks right now, so again, kind of looking at the other quarterbacks on the board. I mean, you can look at. I mean, Russell Wilson's fine as well. I mean, I didn't mention him explicitly, but Russell Wilson's fine. Deshaun Watson going up against Jacksonville. Although if this is the second game, yeah. See, there is also something to say about when a team is playing another team for the second time in a season. So in this case, Deshaun Watson, who's playing the Jaguars for the second time this year. There's something to be said about those fantasy performances being worse the second time around. So as high of upside Deshaun Watson has, I think there's also downside in the fact that because this is the second game of the season, he might not dominate this one, especially because this one's on the road as opposed to the first game being at home, right? And then, I mean, you can also look at, there's some other names on the board here. Like Matt Ryan's fine to me at 6,400 going up at home against Denver. I mean, he's had certainly some up and down fantasy performances, but I think the game script will be one that allows Matt Ryan to succeed. And if not him, then maybe their running backs do well. Todd Gurley, rather. Yeah, are there any other quarterbacks? And I also really like Justin Herbert this week. He's one, right? Because, he has these great fantasy performances, and I don't think he's gone up. Yeah. He just throws the ball. They make him throw so much. His last 3 games, 34, 43, 43. These 2 games right here, it's actually interesting to think about because, these 2 games right here, they were up, right? This Jacksonville game, they were up. He still threw the ball 43 times. This game, they were up for the most part, until they did the Chargers thing. And he still threw 43 passes. So I think the game scripts will be fine for Justin Herbert, even if the Chargers are winning late. We'll still allow for Herbert to throw the ball often. Excuse me, my goodness. All right, so let's go to running backs here. And as far as running backs are concerned, there's a lot at the top, right? There's definitely a lot at the top of the pricing spectrum. This does not make sense. I didn't notice this the first time I was looking at pricing. I guess this is only because Mike Davis had just played as a starter. Or he had his 3 good games and then he just sucked. But now he's not the starter anymore because Christian McCaffrey is presumably back. Although I guess if there is a setback for McCaffrey, right, then Mike Davis makes sense at 6,700. Otherwise, obviously not. But McCaffrey is certainly the highest upside running back on the board when healthy. Right, he's going to catch a ton of passes. He's going to be targeted a bunch of times. right? And he'll get his opportunities. Do I want to pay $8,500 for him though? Maybe. I don't know. His opportunities may certainly go down because of the game scripting. Kansas City, I mean, being in Kansas City, that game should probably be very handily decided by the Chiefs, right? I mean, if we look at the Vegas totals right now, the Chiefs are 10.5-point favorites. I don't see McCaffrey being a fantastic play at 8,500, but I mean, if you're looking at fantasy point ceiling, then this is it, right? This is your fantasy point ceiling with Christian McCaffrey. The only downside, of course, is that it's going to be hard to pay up elsewhere. But again, if you want to go with that Broncos stack, it doesn't matter, right? It really doesn't. So I guess you could go there. I'm not sure where ownership's going to be on him. Any ownership projection that I've looked at is not very... there's no consensus, I should say, right? There's no consensus on where his ownership is. I mean, some might say 25, some might say 15. So I don't know. Make your own decisions there, I guess. Dalvin Cook going up against Detroit. Obviously, we saw him last week score a ton of fantasy points. What is it, like 47? 51. He scored 51, scoring 3 receiving touchdowns, or 3 rushing touchdowns and a receiving touchdown. 163 yards on the ground. Right? I mean, he was... I wouldn't expect... Like, a lot of that was volatile, right? And maybe he does get that again, right? Maybe he does. However, Detroit is so focused on the rush defense. Like, they're so... Like, Matt Patricia is very keen on being like, oh, we want to be able to stop the run and everything, which isn't really how you play modern-day football, but that's really not... I mean, that's not the point of this it's not the point of the podcast, right? You want to know the good fantasy plays, right? But Dalvin Cook could have a good game, right? He certainly has it in him, but I just don't see... I don't know. I mean, he could be the highest scoring running back, and then that'll justify the $8,200 price tag. That's fine. Could work. Could certainly work. But I'd rather go a little cheaper here because there's definitely cheaper options at running back this week that are certainly fine to play. I mean, you have Derrick Henry, who I like, going up against Chicago. I think game script... I keep saying game script, but I think the situation will be favorable for him, right, in terms of how that game should play out, right? They're 6.5-point favorites. Chicago, I mean, their whole quarterback situation is just bad. Nick Foles is bad. Mitch Trubisky's bad. You know, what are you going to do? And I think that should present a favorable situation where Tennessee runs the ball a ton. And he did screw... I mean, I don't think Derrick Henry is going to garner a ton of ownership because, I mean, he screwed over some people last week by not really having the greatest game in the world, right? Being outshined in that salary range by Dalvin Cook. So I don't think a ton of people are going to think about him. And I think, to me, I think a lot of people are just going to pay up because of that good game last week by Cook. I think people are going to pay the $300 extra to go up to Dalvin Cook instead of saving that $300 and going down to Derrick Henry, who I think might be the better game theory type play, right? The lower ownership, same upside type deal. Although, again, you can go even cheaper and get great plays, right? Because we can look at James Robinson, who, I mean, this isn't great, you know, what he did against Houston last time, but like the opportunities have very much been there for James Robinson this season. I mean, last week, 22 carries, 119 yards, rushing a touchdown, and he was also targeted 6 times, scoring a touchdown, right? So I don't have any problem going there, honestly. And 7,000, right, against the team that's the worst in football against the run. I don't have any qualms against James Robinson. I mean, honestly, he might be, he might, in some situations, I guess he could be better than Derrick Henry. I mean, you're saving almost $1,000. So, and then James Conner, I like quite a bit because he's going up against Dallas. That should greatly favor him. Chase Edmonds, I feel the same way. And if you want to go into maybe some cheaper guys, you can go with a DJ Dallas, right? I mean, last week he did some work last week. I mean, he scored a touchdown. He had 41 yards, 5 targets, all that jazz. He should get the bulk of the opportunities again this week. And going up against Buffalo, I mean, that's not the greatest situation for him in the world, but it could certainly work for 5,000, right? And then you look at someone like Melvin Gordon, who's going up against the Atlanta Falcons, who are just awful against running backs in all facets of the game. I mean, some of these game logs are not encouraging, except this one is right against the Jets. But I mean, he should get more than 8 carries. I mean, you also have to look at those 2 games, right? Like Kansas City demolished the Broncos, so obviously the Broncos threw the ball more, and the Broncos were playing catch up for a lot of that second half against the Chargers. So obviously he wasn't running the ball, but he got 7 targets, right? So I think Melvin Gordon will probably be very highly owned, but he kind of deserves to be, considering he's only 5,300 and he's going to get targets and he's going to get carries against a terrible defense. Need I say more? Even if they're losing, right? I mean, if the game stays as close as Vegas might project it to, I think Melvin Gordon will still get his opportunities. So I'm not terribly concerned there. I mean, there's other running backs on the board that we can talk about. I mean, you can talk about a David Montgomery, possibly. You could talk about a Josh Jacobs at 6,300. I mean, if you want to really throw one out there, Nyheim Hines is, I think, on the board as well. He's 4,400 this week. I guess I should spell his name right, I mean, he's one of those guys where his opportunities are just everywhere, right? But I think he's cheap, and it's also one of those situations where he's probably going to get a good number of targets because they're playing the Ravens. And if this is a pick'em. Didn't expect that, honestly. I don't know. The situation could favor Nyheim Hines either way. Yeah. So let's talk about wide receivers. Yeah, let's talk about wide receivers. Kind of going on down the list here. I think Julio Jones might be my top wide receiver in the player pool here. I mean, we can look at the data. This is all the air yard data, right? I mean, in the last 4 weeks, so 5, 6, 7, 8, guy's gotten 39% of the air yards and 27% of the targets. I mean, obviously he's going to dominate the opportunities for this team. And I think this game will be where the Falcons are going to throw the ball a ton, just because. I think there'd be a lot of passing in this game. I think if you want a game stack, this game is very stackable. But yeah, I mean, Julio Jones is dominating those opportunities, and he's getting the most, really, of anyone in this player pool, right? So I'm a big fan of Julio Jones this week. But then there's also reason to talk about DK Metcalf and even Tyler Lockett, right? I mean, now their prices are differentiating enough where Metcalf is $1,000 more expensive than Lockett, but I think they also have similar upside. Right, I do think they have similar upside, and because of that, I think it all just comes down to ownership. Where it's weird with Seattle because it's really only one wide receiver dominates the game at a time, right? I mean, you can take Russell Wilson, and you can take both DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. But it's just incredible how reverse correlated they are, where it's like neither of them can really have a good game in the same day, right? Like a good Metcalf game is automatically a bad Lockett game, and vice versa, right? I mean, when Tyler Lockett scored 56 DraftKings points in this game against Arizona, what did Metcalf do? Metcalf did nothing. But then in the opposite, Metcalf scored 43 against San Francisco the other last week, and then Tyler Lockett scores 7, right? Like, it's like whack-a-mole, right? So it's like if you're playing one lineup, God bless, you know. But if you're playing a multitude of lineups, then it's like you got to take stands, I guess. I mean, you just can't put both in the same lineup. But yeah, and then, I mean, running it back with Stephon Diggs, I mean, Stephon Diggs is even doing really well. How is he doing, like, in the grand scheme of things? Yeah. So, like, among all the wide receivers in the last 4 weeks here, obviously Devontae Adams is, you know, off the... Yeah. But Stephon Diggs is, like, number 4 in weighted opportunity rating. Right, he's getting 42% of the air yards and 35% of the targets. He has 459 air yards. Where does that even rank? That's second. That's second to John Hightower, who... Yeah. Right, so Stephon Diggs is getting a ton of opportunities, and I think it's worth taking those shots there with Diggs there. Yeah, and then I mean, we could talk about other guys. We could talk about Will Fuller, who could possibly have a good game, right? I mean, he hasn't exploded, really. I mean, he had a good game against Tennessee, decent game against Minnesota. But, like, his whole career, I mean, obviously he's been, like, very spotty. So, like, you could take Will Fuller. It just could backfire, right? So, and then we can talk about some of these value guys, where we can talk about, I mean, there's a lot of bad value on the board. I think if you want to take your shots at cheaper guys, I mean, Devontae Parker does seem underpriced at 5,200, and then making your best judgment as to what will happen with a Cowboys wide receiver, I think that's also worth looking at, right? Because CeeDee Lamb is 4,900, Michael Gallup is 4,000. Something could happen there. And then I also think, actually, if you really want your value wide receiver, I think Deontay Johnson at 5,000 is pretty cheap. Going up against the Cowboys. Obviously, last week I don't think was his best showing, right? I mean, he only saw 3 targets. That was against the Ravens, right? The Ravens have the ability to just pick a wide receiver and say, okay, he's automatically going to have a bad game because we're going to shadow him, right? So I really wouldn't make it so that Baltimore game or even the Eagles game before that in week 5 is of heavy influence in all of this, right? So I don't know. But Deontay Johnson seems cheap. All right, let's talk about tight ends, right? I mean, tight ends, there's never a ton to talk about with tight ends, right? I mean, when it comes to tight ends, it's like you have Travis Kelce, and then you go from there. Which, I mean, Travis Kelce's fine this week, right? I mean, he's always okay. He's always fine, right? I mean, if you want to... Obviously, he's going to get the most opportunity, except Austin Hooper kind of did as well, if you want to go there. But yeah, I mean, my guys here, I mean, it's kind of in the order of pricing, really. I mean, you can go Travis Kelce at 7,200. I do think Mark Andrews is becoming very underpriced. I know he hasn't been terribly involved, but like still, He has the third highest weighted opportunity rating of any tight end, getting 25% of his team's air yards, 22% of targets in the last 4 weeks. Right? So, I'm not very inclined to be like Mark Andrews is bad. He's actually just really cheap at 4,800. And the game logs, his price just nosedived quick, right? I mean, he was 6,200, he scored 17. He was 6,500, scored 4. 5,800, scored 6. And these were like in somewhat more difficult matchups. I mean, in the Philadelphia game, he kind of just it just didn't work out for him. The other tight end there was targeted more. But yeah, I mean, this one was like, that's a difficult defensive team. Like Pittsburgh's good, right? But his price being 4,800 does seem kind of criminal. And I think you don't even have to stack him with Lamar Jackson. I mean, even going naked Mark Andrews is fine, to be honest with you. Like, I don't have any issue there. And then you can look at who was the one that popped up here. So Austin Hooper, is that? I don't think they're even playing this week now. I guess that would be something worth discussing if Austin Hooper were playing, but Cleveland's not playing. But yeah, so I don't even know what I was going to say. Oh yeah, as I said before, like Noah Fant is a fine play, right? Because Atlanta struggles against tight ends. There is always the issue of his lack of productivity since week 2, because weeks 1 and 2 he scored 19 and 17.7, right? But then he scored 11 last week. I don't know. I mean, he's like 6th in all this, right? He's getting about 24% of the air yards in Denver, 21% of targets. If he's going to go off, if he's going to make up for some of his lack of production this season, this game would be it, right? And at 4,600, that seems like a really good price to attack. I mean, this crop of tight ends are reasonably priced. Except, I mean, of course, you're paying a premium for Kelsey. You're going to pay a premium for Darren Waller, which may or may not be justified. You could pay 5,800 for him. You could pay the 5,100 for Mark Andrews or T.J. Hawkinson. I wouldn't be totally against that, really. But yeah, I mean, that's tight ends. I don't have any strong tight end takes. Maybe if you need value, Hayden Hurst is your move at 4,100. I don't know where he is in the grand scheme of things. I mean, this isn't terribly good, but he's had his moments this season. Although, I mean, what he's done this season and kind of how his role has been with Atlanta, he doesn't really seem like the guy that's going to help you win a tournament. So, really, my top tight ends, for the most part, I think would be just the standard Kelsey, Waller, Andrews, Hawkinson, Fant. I don't know what the hell I'm calling him. Yeah. So, I mean, let's just move to defense. And obviously there's one thing that sticks out when you look at defense this week, and that is the Steelers, where they're 4,900. I'm pretty sure I saw something on Twitter at some point this week that said that this 4,900 for Pittsburgh is the highest price you're paying for a defense ever. And it makes sense, right? I mean, thank God I have them in season long. Right, I have them in season-long fantasy, so that's going to help me a lot. Thank God. But yeah, I mean, there's not much to hate here. It's just the price, right? At 4,900, you have to think that this Pittsburgh team's got to score, at least one special teams or defensive touchdown, with interceptions and sacks and fumbles, which is very much possible. Right, it's well within the realm of possibility. However, if they kind of underperform, like if they don't get the turnovers, if they don't get the sacks, I mean, you're paying a very high premium for that, and defense is very volatile. So, yeah, I mean, it's worth thinking about that. But I still think even at that insane price, the Steelers are going to be one of the higher owned defenses. Maybe not the highest owned because that pricing discrepancy is notable, but they'll be owned. Where other defensive spots do I really like? I think you can also get away with like Washington defense. Washington defense is actually okay. Did these two teams play a couple weeks ago? I feel like they did. Yeah, they did. They only scored 4 DraftKings points. They had a pick, a sack. Yeah, but I think in the second meeting that'll be fine. They're home this time, so that could be advantageous for them. But I do think they're one of the higher upside defenses of the slate. We can also look at the Tennessee defense. Right, they've been very solid this season. Maybe not fantasy-wise, but when they force picks, they get their sacks. They haven't recorded the sack in 2 weeks. Ugh, that's not good. I don't know, but I think against Chicago, there's the opportunity there, especially going up against a crappy quarterback, whoever they start, really. I don't know. I never know how to judge these defenses because it's just so random a lot of the time. I mean, Dolphins defense was the nuts last week against Los Angeles Rams. I don't know. I mean, if we want to look at here and see where the value, like again, Tennessee, that's the value, right? You can even look at like Washington, like I said, Pittsburgh, maybe even Arizona defense. Oh, goodness. You're right. Like the Arizona defense might be just playing with my tabs here. Right. Arizona defense might be something worthwhile. So there's that, right? Yeah. Let's talk about, some showdown, right? Let's talk about Monday night. Actually, so you could talk prime time, right? So let's go to the prime time slate. Get through all that crap. Goodness. All right. So we'll go showdown, right? Kind of browse showdown here. And I mean, your standard guys are in play. I mean, your Kamara, your Brady, Breeze. Michael Thomas coming back could certainly help. Depending on what happens with Chris Godwin, that's what you would want to do with Mike Evans, right? I mean, it's hard to take Mike Evans this season, period. But it's even harder to take him when Chris Godwin is on the field with him. And also you have Antonio Brown now, right? Antonio Brown's going to be in that mix of Tampa Bay wide receivers. And, it just getting my head out of the data and looking at more of how chemistry works out. I mean, Antonio Brown and Tom Brady seem to be very good friends, right? And he's also a friend. Obviously, the relationship with Gronk still exists, right? So I think Mike Evans kind of gets shuffled out of things because Chris Godwin is a slightly better wide receiver in my mind than Mike Evans is. And, of course, you have all these new targets. Well, I mean, you have these targets now that Tom Brady already has great rapport with. So it's like, yeah. Alvin Kamara, his upside is greatly dependent on whether or not Mike Evans is playing. It seems like he will be, so I would have to downgrade Kamara because of that. But it's not a terrible downgrade. I just wouldn't pay, $16,800 for him as a captain under those circumstances, right? I'd rather pay for any other skill player, honestly, in that spot. I don't have too many showdown takes, but that's pretty much it there. And then I could also touch on Monday Night Football, because Monday Night Football, you got this abysmal game between the Patriots and the Jets. I wonder if the showdown slate's even up yet. I don't think so. They have freaking Madden stream. They have Madden streams, though. You can always look at a Madden stream, play that godforsaken slate. Um, yeah, getting dinged all around here. For Monday Night Football, guys like Damian Harris. Damian Harris, if he plays, I think isn't that bad of an option at the running back position. Or, I mean, if you're going to play showdown, right? Because his carries are going up. I mean, he's not very much involved in the passing game, but right now, even as a road team, the Patriots are 8.5, 7.5 point favorites, depending on where you look, right? So you do have that situation where if Damian Harris does play, because he is questionable, he could be a really good play for showdown slates. Just focus on this, right? I don't know, Jamison Crowder. Jacoby Myers, I think, is actually in the last 4 weeks. Yeah. That's interesting to think about. That might be skewed from one game. I'm not sure. Let's look at this. Yeah, I mean, it's actually skewed because he's certainly getting involved in this offense, right? And I mean, this week, week 7 against San Francisco, had 6 targets, caught 4 of them 60 yards, scored 10, whatever, right? Last week, 10 targets, 6 catches, 58 yards, 13.8 DraftKings points. Hasn't erupted yet, but I think there's reason to believe because of those last 2 weeks worth of games, he could be very much on the radar for being a solid play, right? I mean, even in that time, right? I mean, let's just look at week 7 and 8 in terms of all this data, right? So in that time, he's had 189 air yards the last 2 games. Average depth of target, 12 yards, right? Is getting 61% of the air yards, 35% of the targets. I mean, Jacoby Myers is quite involved in this offense. And obviously, this Jets team is abysmal. So Jacoby Myers might be a guy you could put as a captain, right? Especially if Damian Harris is out. I think he would actually make the better captain. James White would obviously be the guy if Harris is out. Maybe they wouldn't run the ball too much. You could also go Rex Burkhead. Because, we all remember his troll game, right? Where, right? Because that was like just Bill Belichick, I guess, screwing with people. Because he had 2 rushing touchdowns and a passing touchdown. He scored 35 DraftKings points almost. So if I were to say I want any Jets player, I mean, I would just say no. But I guess if you're playing Showdown, it's necessary. So, I mean, we can add weeks 5 and 6 back to this. Right? And who's been... So, I mean, Jamison Crowder, he's questionable. Was he out last week? No. I mean, Jamison Crowder would obviously be your number 1 guy because in the 4 games he's played this season, he's had at least 10 targets. He's only had 1 bad fantasy game, which was week 6 against Miami. If he plays this week, I mean, he's very much the move, I would assume, right? So, Jamison Crowder for sure. You figure, I guess, your number 2 guys would be Mims, Brashard Perriman. I don't freaking know. I don't know. It's hard. It's hard to figure out. I mean, at that point, I would just go Patriots defense. And if I had to say, pick one, like, okay, just to fit whatever constraints DraftKings is going to put on you, I'm just saying Jamison Crowder is my 1 Jets player in a showdown lineup and then 5 Patriots. Because I don't see how even 2 Jets players can be optimal, to be honest with you. So, all right, that'll do it for me, Evan Cheney, for the cruelfan.com podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at echeney69. That's at ECHENEY69. And I hope to see you guys once again next week. Thank you.